The wind that tore through the mining town of Split Rock was not merely cold. It was a living, hateful thing that hunted for gaps in chinking and tears in coats, carrying with it the sulphurous reek of the smelters and the biting grit of early winter snow. It howled down the main thoroughfare, rattling the frosted glass of the Lucky Strike saloon, where the air inside was thick with tobacco smoke and the sour stench of unwashed men. Clara stood near the end of the mahogany bar, her hand resting instinctively on the swell of her stomach. She was 8 months gone, her belly distorting the fit of a dress that had once been fine but was now gray with road dust and mended at the seams. She did not belong here. Every glance from the miners and drifters huddled over their whiskeys told her so. She was a woman alone, heavy with child. And in a place like Split Rock, that meant she was either a beggar or a target. She had only come in for warmth. The boarding house had turned her away an hour ago, the proprietor sneering at her empty purse, and the wind outside had threatened to freeze the blood in her veins. She just needed a moment to feel her fingers again. "Well, look at what we have here," a voice drawled, thick with drink and entitlement. Clara stiffened. She did not turn, hoping the man would lose interest. But the heavy tread of boots on the sawdust floor drew closer. A hand, large and smelling of tallow, landed heavily on her shoulder, fingers digging into the fabric of her shawl. Silas Thorne. Everyone in the territory knew the name, and most feared it. He owned the largest claim in the valley and half the businesses in town. He was a man accustomed to taking what he wanted, whether it was silver from the earth or dignity from the desperate. "You look like you are carrying a heavy load." "Sweetheart," Thorne said, his breath hot against her neck. "Why do you not let a gentleman buy you a drink? Maybe we can find somewhere quieter to discuss how a pretty thing like you ended up so ragged." His hand slid down from her shoulder, grazing her back, drifting lower with a familiarity that made bile rise in Clara's throat. It was a touch she knew. It was the touch of a man who saw her not as a human being, but as a piece of property that had been left unattended. "Please," she whispered, pulling away. "I only want water." Thorne laughed, a harsh barking sound that silenced the nearby tables. "Water? You come into my saloon and ask for water." He stepped closer, crowding her against the bar. His hand moved again, this time reaching for her waist, his fingers pressing intimately against her side. "Come on now. Do not be ungrateful. I can make your night a lot warmer." The rage hit Clara before the fear did. It was a white-hot bolt of lightning, born of months of hunger, miles of walking, and the endless, grinding humiliation of begging for scraps. She spun around, her movement sharper than her condition should have allowed, and brought her hand across his face. The sound of the slap was like a pistol crack in the sudden silence of the room. Thorne stumbled back, his hand flying to his cheek, where a red welt was already blooming. The shock on his face turned instantly to a dark, murderous purple. "You little witch," he snarled. "Sheriff," he roared, turning toward the door where the lawman was warming his hands by the potbelly stove. "Sheriff Miller, did you see that? She assaulted me. Sheriff Miller," a man whose spine had long ago been replaced by the weight of Thorne's bribes, sighed and pushed himself off the wall. He looked at Clara, then at Thorne, and made the calculation that kept him employed. "All right, Miss," Miller said, walking over with his thumbs hooked in his belt. "Let us go." Clara's eyes widened. "He touched me," she said, her voice trembling but loud. "He put his hands on me. I was defending myself." Thorne wiped his mouth, sneering. She is a hysterical vagrant. Miller, probably looking to steal a purse. Look at her. Lock her up before she hurts someone else. Miller took Clara by the arm. His grip was not brutal, but it was firm, brooking no argument. "Assaulting a prominent citizen. That is a night in the cell for you. Miss, maybe the judge will hear you in the morning, if he is of a mind to." "No!" Clara cried, digging her heels into the sawdust. "I have nowhere to go. It is freezing outside. Then you should have thought of that before you struck Mr. Thorne," Miller said flatly. He dragged her toward the door. As she was hauled past the tables, Clara looked around wildly, searching for a single sympathetic face. She saw only hard eyes, amused smirks, and men who looked away, staring into their glasses to avoid the inconvenience of a conscience. Except for one, in the far corner, shadowed by the brim of a battered hat. A man sat alone. He had not laughed. He had not looked away. He sat perfectly still, a half-empty glass of whiskey before him, watching the scene with eyes that looked like chipped flint. He was older than the young bucks at the bar, perhaps in his mid-30s, with a face weathered by sun and wind into a map of hard terrain. He looked at Clara, and for a heartbeat, she saw something flicker in his gaze. Not pity, but a sharp, recognizing jolt, like a man seeing a ghost. Then the door opened, and the wind swallowed her scream. The jail cell was a box of darkness and ice. There was no cot, only a wooden bench and a floor of rough-hewn pine planks that leaked drafts from the crawlspace beneath. Sheriff Miller had tossed her a single, moth-eaten blanket before locking the iron door and retreating to his office, where the warmth of the stove did not reach. Clara huddled in the corner on the floor, unable to climb onto the narrow bench for fear of falling off in her sleep. She wrapped the thin wool blanket around herself, tucking her knees as close to her chest as her belly would allow. Her breath plumed in the air before her, ghostly white in the moonlight that spilled through the high, barred window. She was shivering violently, her teeth chattering with a sound that seemed deafening in the quiet. But her hands never left her stomach. She rubbed the swell of it, a frantic, circular motion, trying to push her own meager warmth through the layers of fabric to the life inside. "I am sorry," she whispered into the dark, her voice cracking. "I am so sorry, little one." The baby kicked, a strong, rhythmic thump against her ribs. It felt like a protest. "I know," she murmured. "I know." She closed her eyes, and the stone walls of the jail dissolved into the memory she tried hardest to keep at bay. She saw Thomas, not the Thomas of the end, sweaty, desperate, smelling of gin, but the Thomas she had married in Ohio. He had been full of big talk and bright smiles, promising her a sprawling ranch in the West, cattle as far as the eye could see, a life of freedom. She remembered the day he had come home with the bruises on his face, the day the furniture started disappearing. He had told her it was bad luck, just a run of bad luck. He never told her about the men he borrowed from until they were banging on the door in the middle of the night. The cold of the floor seeped through her dress, biting into her hip. Clara shifted, groaning as pain shot through her lower back. She was so tired. Exhaustion lay on her like a physical weight, heavier than the child, heavier than the grief. She wondered if she would freeze to death here. It seemed a distinct possibility. If she fell asleep and her core temperature dropped too low, she might simply never wake up. The thought was terrifying, yet underneath the terror lay a seductive, dangerous comfort. If she slept and did not wake, the hunger would stop. The fear would stop. "No," she hissed, forcing her eyes open. "Not yet. I have to keep you safe." She forced herself to sit up, to move her limbs, to keep the blood flowing. But the night was long, and the silence of the jail was absolute. Eventually, the exhaustion won. Her head drooped, her cheek pressed against the rough wood of the floor, and the dark pulled her down. The sensation of being watched woke her. It was not a sound, but a feeling, a prickling at the back of her neck. Clara gasped, jerking awake, disoriented. The gray light of dawn was filtering through the bars, illuminating dust motes dancing in the freezing air. She tried to push herself up, but her body was stiff, her joints locked from the cold. She let out a small cry of pain. "Easy now," a voice said. It was a deep voice, rough like gravel grinding under a boot heel, but quiet. Clara scrambled backward until her spine hit the wall, pulling the blanket up to her chin. She squinted toward the cell door. Sheriff Miller was standing there, keys in hand, looking tired and irritable. But he was not the one who had spoken. Beside him stood the man from the saloon. In the light of day, he looked even more formidable. He was tall, his frame lean but broad-shouldered, wearing a sheepskin coat that had seen many winters. His face was shadowed by beard stubble, and his eyes were the color of slate, unreadable and distant. He stood with a stillness that was unnatural, his hands hanging loose at his sides. "Open it," the stranger said. Miller grunted, jamming the key into the lock. "I am telling you, Eli, you are throwing good money away. Thorne is going to be spitting mad when he hears she is out." "Let him spit," the man named Eli replied. The lock tumbled with a heavy clank, and the door swung open. "You are free to go, miss," Miller said, stepping back. "Bail is paid, $10. More than you are worth, if you ask me." Clara stared at them, her mind sluggish. Paid? Eli stepped into the cell. He seemed to fill the small space entirely. He did not look at the sheriff. His eyes were fixed on Clara. He took in her shivering form, the blue tint of her lips, the way she clutched the blanket. "Can you walk?" he asked. Clara nodded dumbly, though she was not sure if it was true. She reached for the wall to haul herself up. Her legs shook violently as she put weight on them. She swayed, black spots dancing in her vision. Eli moved. He did not rush, but he crossed the distance in a single stride. His hand caught her elbow, steadying her. His grip was firm, warm through her sleeve. "Come on," he said. "Let us get you out of this icebox." Clara let him guide her out of the cell, through the office, and out onto the boardwalk. The morning air was crisp and painfully bright. The snow that had threatened the night before had fallen, coating Split Rock in a deceptively pristine layer of white. The sudden brightness was too much. The hunger and the cold caught up to her all at once. The world tilted on its axis. The wooden planks of the boardwalk rushed up to meet her face. She expected the hard impact, but it never came. Strong arms caught her, scooping her up before she hit the ground. She felt the rough wool of the sheepskin coat against her cheek, smelled wood smoke and leather and horses. "I have got you," the voice rumbled against her ear. Then the darkness returned, softer this time. When Clara opened her eyes again, she was moving. She was lying on a bed of straw and blankets in the back of a wagon. The rhythmic creak of wheels and the plodding of horses were the only sounds. She sat up with a gasp, panic seizing her chest. "Whoa, there!" the voice called out from the driver's seat. The wagon lurched to a halt. Eli turned on the bench seat, looking back at her. "You are awake," he stated. "Where are you taking me?" Clara demanded. She scrambled backward, pressing herself against the wooden side of the wagon box. Her breath came in short, white puffs. "Who are you? Name is Eli Vance," he said, "and I'm taking you to my place. It is about 5 miles out of town." "Why?" Clara's hand went to her belly, her eyes darting around the landscape. They were in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by rolling plains of white and stands of pine trees burdened with snow. There was not a house in sight. "Because you would be dead by sundown if I left you on that boardwalk," Eli said simply. He turned back around, flicking the reins. "We are almost there. Sit tight." Clara watched the back of his head, her mind racing. She checked her pockets, empty, just as they had been. She had nothing to steal. She was pregnant, dirty, and exhausted. What could a man like this possibly want with her? Her experience with men had taught her that charity always came with an invoice, usually one she could not afford to pay. The wagon crested a low ridge, and the homestead came into view. It was modest, bordering on stark, a cabin built of dark. Sturdy logs sat nestled against the shelter of a rocky outcrop. A plume of gray smoke rose steadily from the stone chimney. To the left stood a barn that looked better maintained than the house, and a corral where 2 horses stood with their heads lowered against the wind. It was isolated, silent, and terrified her. Eli pulled the wagon up to the front of the cabin and set the brake. He jumped down, his boots crunching in the snow, and came around to the back. He reached for her, but Clara flinched away. "I can walk," she snapped. Eli halted, his hands raised slightly, palms open. "Suit yourself." Clara climbed down. Her legs felt like lead, and her head swam. But she forced herself to stand upright. She would not show weakness. "Not here, not with him." Eli walked to the door of the cabin and pushed it open. "Go on in, it is warm." Clara hesitated on the threshold. The interior was dim, lit by the fire roaring in the hearth. It smelled of pine sap and coffee. It looked clean, spare, masculine, but clean. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice hard. "I have no money to pay you back for the bail. I cannot work your land." Eli stood by the wagon, beginning to unhitch the team. He did not look at her. "I did not ask for money." He said, "Then what? Men do not just pay $10 for strangers." Eli paused. He rested his hand on the flank of the bay mare, looking out toward the tree line. For a moment, the stoic mask slipped, and she saw a profound, ancient weariness in the set of his shoulders. "I had a room that wasn't being used," he said quietly, "and I saw a woman who needed it. That is all." He turned his gaze back to her. "Go inside. Ma'am, there is stew in the pot over the fire. Eat." Clara stared at him for a long moment, searching for the lie, the leer, the trap. She found only a blank wall of reserve. Shivering, she turned and stepped inside. The first 3 days were a blur of wariness and recovery. True to his word, Eli did not impose. In fact, he barely spoke. That first night, after she had eaten 3 bowls of venison stew with hands that shook, he had gathered a pile of blankets and a lantern. "Where are you going?" she had asked, watching him from the rocking chair by the fire. "Barn," he said. "The loft is warm enough. You take the bed, but this is your house." He had just tipped his hat and walked out into the dark. Clara had dragged the heavy dresser in front of the door that night. She had slept with a fire poker within arm's reach, but the door handle never turned. On the second day, a doctor arrived. A grumpy old man named Doc Higgins, who smelled of peppermint and antiseptic. He examined her, listened to the baby's heart, and pronounced her malnourished and exhausted, but fundamentally sound. "He tells me you are staying in the winter," Higgins grunted as he packed his bag. Clara looked at Eli, who was standing by the window, whittling a piece of wood. "He is? If the snow keeps up, you won't be getting far," Eli said without looking up. When the doctor left, Eli paid him with a sack of potatoes and $2 silver. Again, he asked for nothing from Clara. By the 4th day, Clara's strength began to return. She started to move around the cabin, her curiosity battling her caution. It was a bachelor's home, devoid of frills, but filled with evidence of a quiet, deliberate life. On the mantelpiece, there was a small wooden box. Clara opened it one afternoon while Eli was out chopping wood. Inside lay a collection of carved wooden animals: horses, bears, a tiny eagle with spread wings. They were exquisite, smoothed to a satin finish by sanding. They were toys for a child that was not here. She closed the box quickly when she heard his boots on the porch. Later that day, she looked out the back window. About 50 yards from the cabin, enclosed by a low picket fence that was nearly buried in snow, stood 2 wooden crosses. One was large, the other small. Clara felt a tightness in her throat. She understood then the silence that hung over Eli Vance. It was not just the silence of a man who lived alone. It was the silence of a house that had once held laughter and now held only memory. That evening, they sat by the fire. The wind was picking up outside, a low moan that signaled a storm. "Why?" Clara asked. Eli looked up from the harness he was mending. "Why what? Why bring me here? Why sleep in the barn? You do not know me. I could be a thief. I could be a killer." Eli pushed the needle through the thick leather. "You defended yourself against a man who had no right to touch you. That does not make you a killer. It makes you someone who has had enough." Clara stared into the flames. "I had a husband," she said softly. It was the first time she had volunteered information. Eli stopped working. His name was Thomas. She continued, the words spilling out as if the dam had finally broken. "He was handsome. He could charm the birds out of the trees. We came west for gold, or silver, or land. Whatever he was dreaming of that week." She laughed bitterly. "He was not a bad man, not at heart. He was just weak. He liked the cards more than the work. He bet money we did not have. One night, in a saloon not so different from the one in town, he put up a marker he couldn't cover. She turned her head, her eyes wet. The game went wrong. Accusations were made. Guns were drawn. Thomas was not fast enough. "I am sorry," Eli said. His voice was low, rumbling in his chest. "That wasn't the end of it," Clara whispered. "The men he owed. They didn't care that he was dead. They said his debt was my debt. They came to the rooming house. They said they would take payment in trade if I didn't have the cash." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I climbed out the window. I ran. I have been running for 3 months. The fire popped, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney." Eli set the harness down. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, looking at her with an intensity that made her catch her breath. "Nobody's going to come through that door. Clara," he said, "not Thomas's creditors, not Silas Thorne, not the sheriff. You are safe here." Clara looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time. She saw the lines of grief etched around his mouth, the loneliness in his eyes that mirrored her own. "Why?" she asked again, barely a whisper. Eli stood up. He walked to the window, looking out at the darkening white world. "Because I know what it is like to lose everything," he said, his voice rough with unused emotion. "And I know what it is like to have nowhere left to run." He turned back to her. "Sleep well, Clara." He put on his coat and hat and walked out into the biting cold, leaving her alone with the warmth of the fire and the ghosts that suddenly seemed a little less terrifying. Outside, the snow began to fall in earnest. Heavy, thick flakes drifted down, covering the tracks of the wagon, covering the path to the barn, sealing the cabin into a white, silent world. The gray sky lowered, pressing down on the valley. Winter had arrived, and with it, the trap was sprung. Clara was safe, yes, but she was also captive, bound by the snow, by her condition, and by the confusing, terrifying kindness of a stranger with a graveyard in his backyard. She walked to the window and watched the lantern light flicker in the barn window across the yard. She placed her hand on the glass, the cold seeping into her palm, and wondered if she had found a sanctuary, or if she had simply traded one prison for another. But as the wind howled, rattling the sturdy logs of the cabin, she realized that for the first time in months, she was not afraid of the cold. She was afraid of the heat that was starting to kindle in her frozen heart. The snow did not stop for 3 days. It fell with a relentless, suffocating silence, stacking against the north wall of the cabin until the logs groaned under the weight. The world outside was erased, reduced to a swirling void of white that swallowed the horizon, the barn, and any hope Clara had of leaving. She stood by the window, her breath fogging the cold glass, watching the flakes drift down like ash. Her bag was packed. It sat by the door, a pathetic bundle of her few remaining possessions, mocking her. She had told Eli that morning that she intended to walk to the stagecoach stop at the crossroads, 5 miles away. She had insisted she could make it. "You will not make it to the gate," Eli had said, not looking up from his coffee. He was right, and she hated him for it. She hated the dependency that chafed at her skin like rough wool. Every log thrown on the fire, every plate of beans set before her, every blanket tucked around her shoulders was a debt she could not pay. And Clara had learned the hard way that debts were always collected eventually. The wind picked up in the afternoon, transforming the heavy snowfall into a blinding blizzard. The cabin became a ship adrift in a white ocean. The isolation was absolute. There was only the crackle of the fire, the rhythmic scrape of Eli's knife against wood, and the heavy, oppressive silence that hung between them. Eli sat in the corner, as he often did, whittling. He was working on a piece of maple, his large, calloused hands moving with a delicacy that seemed at odds with his rough exterior. He had barely spoken since bringing in the last load of firewood, his face a mask of concentration. Clara turned from the window, the restlessness in her limbs bordering on pain. "I cannot stay here," she said, the words bursting out of her. Eli paused, the knife hovering over the wood. "I do not see you walking anywhere in this," he replied calmly. "I mean, I cannot stay here indefinitely. Eli, people will talk. They are probably already talking. A woman living with a man she is not married to? In a town like Split Rock, they will brand me a whore before the snow melts." Eli set the wood down on his knee. He looked at her, his slate-gray eyes steady and unblinking. "Let them talk," he said. "It is easy for you to say," Clara snapped, pacing the small length of the room. "You are a man. You are a landowner. They might think you are a rogue, but they will still buy your cattle. Me? I will be ruined. I have a child to think of. I cannot raise a baby in a town that spits on its mother." Eli was silent for a long time. He looked at the fire, watching the flames lick at the oak logs. The silence stretched, taut and uncomfortable, until Clara felt the urge to apologize, to retreat into the corner and stay quiet. Then Eli spoke. "Marry me?" The words were spoken so quietly, so matter-of-factly, that Clara thought she had imagined them. She froze mid-step, staring at him. "What? Marry me?" he repeated, turning his gaze back to her. "We can ride into town when the storm breaks. The judge can do it, or the preacher, if you prefer." Clara let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "You are joking. I do not joke about things like that," Eli said. "But why?" Clara sputtered. "You do not love me. You barely know me. We have spoken perhaps 100 words to each other in 4 days." "It is not about love," Eli said, his voice devoid of romance. "It is about logic. You need a roof. You need protection. You said it yourself. The town will talk. If you're Mrs. Vance, the gossip stops. The baby has a name. You have a home." Clara stared at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. It was a business transaction. That was what he was offering. A contract. Protection in exchange for what? "And what do you get out of it?" she asked, her voice trembling with suspicion. "A cook? A maid? A warmer for your bed?" Eli flinched. It was a small movement, a tightening of the jaw, but she saw it. "I gotta know that I did not leave a woman and a child to freeze to death," he said tightly. "And I get someone to keep the fire going when I am out on the range. That is all. I am not asking for anything else. Clara, I am not asking for your bed." Clara wrapped her arms around her stomach, stepping back. It sounded too familiar. Thomas had promised to take care of her, too. He had promised her security, and he had delivered her into a nightmare of debt and violence. Marriage, in her experience, was not a sanctuary. It was a cage where the owner held the key and the whip. "No?" she whispered. Eli looked at her, his expression unreadable. "I cannot," she said, her voice gaining strength. "I will not belong to another man. I will not be owned. I will not trade my freedom for a name. Eli, I would rather take my chances with the snow." Eli held her gaze for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. He picked up his knife and the piece of maple. "All right," he said, "the offer stands, but I will not ask again." He went back to his carving, the scrape of steel on wood resuming its rhythm. Clara stood there, shaking, feeling a confusing mixture of relief and a sharp, stinging disappointment she could not name. He had offered her a lifeline, and she had cut it. But as she looked at his bowed head, the way the firelight caught the silver in his beard, she felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to cry. He had tried to save her honor, in his own clumsy, stoic way, and she had thrown it back in his face. The storm raged for 2 weeks. It was a siege. The snow piled up past the windowsills, dimming the cabin into a perpetual twilight. They were forced into a domestic intimacy that was both comforting and excruciating. There was nowhere to hide. Eli was true to his word. He did not bring up the marriage again. He moved around her with a respectful distance, sleeping in the barn despite the freezing temperatures, coming in only to eat and warm up. But he was not idle. While the wind howled outside, Eli went to work on the cabin. He fixed the drafty chinking in the north wall, mixing clay and straw in a bucket by the fire. He oiled the hinges of the door so they no longer screamed when opened, and he continued to carve. It was not until the 3rd day of the storm that Clara realized what he was making. She came out of the bedroom one morning to find the pieces of wood assembled on the floor. Curved rockers, high, slatted sides, a sturdy, flat bottom. It was a cradle. She stopped, her hand going to her throat. Eli was fitting the joints together, tapping them gently with a wooden mallet. He looked up as she entered, his eyes wary, waiting for her rejection. "The wood is cedar," he said gruffly. "It keeps the moths away. Smells good, too." Clara walked over to it slowly. She reached out, running her fingers along the smooth, sanded rim. The craftsmanship was beautiful. It was solid, built to last 100 years. It was built with care. "You made this?" she asked softly. "Just had some spare wood lying around," he muttered, turning his attention back to a joint that fit perfectly well. "I need something to do with my hands." Clara looked at him. He was a man who slept in a freezing barn to give a stranger his bed. A man who offered his name to shield her from shame. And now, a man who was building a bed for a child that was not his. A child another man might have seen as a burden or a bastard. "Thank you," she whispered. Eli grunted, keeping his head down. "Do not mention it." The dynamic in the cabin began to shift after that. The wariness in Clara's eyes began to melt, replaced by a curiosity she could no longer suppress. They fell into a routine. She cooked simple meals of salt pork, beans, and cornbread, and he ate with an appreciation that gratified her. In the evenings, while the blizzard hammered the roof, they sat by the fire. At first, the silence was thick, but slowly, like the thaw that was yet to come. Words began to trickle through. "Tell me about them," Clara said one night. She did not need to specify who. The 2 crosses in the yard were a presence as real as the furniture. Eli stiffened. He stared into the fire, his hands clasped tightly between his knees. For a long time, she thought he would ignore her. "Sarah," he said finally, his voice rasping like dry leaves. Her name was Sarah, and the boy, his name was Samuel. He was 4 years old. He took a breath, a shuddering intake of air. I was away. It was a cattle drive, up to Montana. Good money. We needed the money to buy the adjacent parcel of land. I was gone for 3 months. He picked up the poker and stabbed at the logs, sending sparks flying. It was scarlet fever, swept through the valley like a wildfire. When I rode back, the house was quiet, too quiet. The neighbors had already buried them. He dropped the poker with a clang. I was not there. "Clara, they died alone, calling for me. Maybe, and I was 300 miles away. Counting money." The pain in his voice was raw, an open wound that had never healed. Clara felt tears pricking her eyes. She moved her chair closer to his, the distance between them shrinking. "It was not your fault. Eli," she said fiercely. "You were providing for them. You were doing what a husband does. It feels like my fault," he whispered. "I swore I would never care for anything again. It hurts too much to lose it." Clara looked at her hands, twisted in her lap. "I stayed too long," she confessed into the quiet. Eli looked at her. "With Thomas," she said. "I knew he was in trouble. I knew he was dangerous. He drank. He hit me. Sometimes. Not often, but enough. I saw the bruises on my arms, and I told myself it was an accident. I told myself he would change." She touched her belly. "I wanted this baby to have a father. I was so scared of being alone. So I stayed. I stayed until the creditors came. I stayed until he was dead on a saloon floor. If I had left sooner, maybe he would have hit rock bottom and lived. Maybe my child would not be born on the run." She looked up at him, her eyes swimming. "We both carry ghosts. Eli, we both think we failed the people we were supposed to save." Eli looked at her, and the bleakness in his eyes softened. He reached out, his hand hovering for a moment before settling on her shoulder. It was a heavy, warm weight. "You are surviving. Clara," he said, "you are keeping that baby safe. That is not failure. That is the hardest thing there is." The touch burned through her dress. She did not pull away. She leaned into it, just an inch, closing her eyes. For the first time in years, she did not feel alone in the dark. The days turned into weeks. The storm broke, leaving the world buried under 4 feet of snow. But the wind died down. The sun came out, dazzling and bright, turning the valley into a field of diamonds. The cabin felt different now. It felt less like a shelter and more like a home. The tension of the early days had dissolved into a comfortable companionship. They moved around each other with an easy rhythm. Eli hauling water, Clara kneading dough, their bodies occasionally brushing in the narrow space of the kitchen. Every time they touched, a hand grazing a forearm, a shoulder bumping a shoulder, Clara felt a jolt of electricity that left her breathless. She caught him watching her sometimes. When he thought she wasn't looking, his gaze was not predatory, but it was hungry. It was the look of a starving man staring at a feast he dared not touch. One evening, the fire was roaring particularly high. Clara sat in the rocking chair, resting. Her belly was tight, the skin stretched taut. The baby was awake, turning somersaults that rippled across the fabric of her dress. Eli was sitting on the hearth rug, oiling his rifle. He paused, his eyes catching the movement. He froze. Does it hurt?" he asked, nodding at her stomach. Clara smiled. "No, it feels strange, like a fluttering bird that grew into a kicking mule." She saw the wonder in his face. It was unguarded, open, devastatingly boyish. Without thinking, she sat forward. "Do you want to feel?" Eli blanched. I should not. It is all right," Clara said softly. "Come here." Eli hesitated, wiping his hands on a rag. He stood up and moved toward her slowly, as if approaching a wild animal. He knelt beside the chair. "Give me your hand," she commanded gently. She took his large, rough hand and guided it to the side of her belly. She pressed his palm against the warm wool of her dress. "Wait," she whispered. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, the baby kicked, a solid, decisive thump, right against his hand. Eli gasped. He jerked his hand back as if burned, his eyes wide. "Good Lord," he breathed. "He is strong tonight." Clara laughed, a sound that surprised her with its lightness. Eli looked at his hand, then back at her stomach. He reached out again, this time on his own. He placed his hand gently, reverently, on the curve of her life. He spread his fingers, trying to encompass the miracle of it. "It is alive," he whispered, his voice shaking. "It is really there." He looked up at her. His face was inches from hers. His eyes were shining with tears he refused to shed. At that moment, the stoic rancher was gone. There was only a man who had lost a child, touching the promise of a new one. Clara stopped breathing. The air in the room suddenly felt thick, charged with a terrifying heat. She looked at his lips, chapped from the cold, and felt a pull so strong it made her dizzy. "Eli," she breathed. His gaze dropped to her mouth. His hand was still on her belly, connecting them, grounding them. He leaned in. It was slow, a question asked in the shrinking distance between them. Clara did not retreat. She tilted her head, her eyelids fluttering shut. Their lips met. It was tentative at first, a soft brushing of skin. Then, Eli made a low sound in his throat, and the kiss deepened. His other hand came up to cup her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. It was desperate. It tasted of longing and grief and the sudden, violent hope of spring in the dead of winter. Clara's hands tangled in the collar of his shirt, pulling him closer. For a moment, there was no snow, no past, no danger. There was only the fire and the man who made her feel safe. Then, Eli stiffened. He tore himself away, scrambling back as if he had committed a crime. He stood up, knocking over the stool, his chest heaving. "I cannot," he rasped. Clara sat frozen, her lips still tingling, her heart crashing against her ribs. "Eli, I cannot do this," he said, backing toward the door. He looked panicked, his eyes wild. "It is not right. You are vulnerable. I am taking advantage. I promised you safety, not this, Eli." "No," Clara cried, reaching out. "I wanted it." He shook his head violently. "It is the storm. It is the isolation. You do not know what you want, and I cannot replace him. I cannot be what you need." He grabbed his coat from the peg. "I will check the horses." He fled. The door slammed shut behind him, letting in a gust of freezing air that chilled the room instantly. Clara sat alone in the rocking chair, touching her lips. tears of confusion and humiliation stinging her eyes. She had opened the door, and he had slammed it in her face. The next morning, the silence was back. But this time, it was not comfortable. It was heavy, jagged, full of things unsaid. Eli avoided her gaze entirely. He spent hours in the barn, finding unnecessary chores. Clara felt a hollow ache in her chest. She wanted to scream at him, to shake him, to tell him that he was a fool for thinking this was just about the storm. But she held her tongue. She had her pride, what little was left of it. Around noon, the sound of barking dogs broke the stillness. Eli was at the woodpile. He straightened up, his hand going instantly to the revolver at his hip. Clara moved to the window. A rider was approaching, picking his way carefully through the deep drifts. The horse was blowing hard, steam rising from its flanks. Eli walked out to the gate to meet him. Clara cracked the door open to listen. It was Jeremiah, an old trapper who lived in a shack 10 miles up the valley. He looked frozen half to death, his beard a block of ice. "Morning, Eli," Jeremiah wheezed. "Or afternoon, hard to tell with this glare. Jeremiah?" Eli nodded, keeping his hand near his gun. "You made it through the drifts?" "Barely. I had to check my trap lines. Thought I would see if you were still alive up here." "We are managing," Eli said shortly. Jeremiah's eyes drifted to the cabin, spotting Clara in the doorway. He tipped his fur cap. "Ma'am?" He looked back at Eli, his expression darkening. "Listen, Eli, I was in town 2 days ago before the last pass closed up. There is talk." Eli's posture stiffened. "What kind of talk? About the woman?" Jeremiah said, lowering his voice, though the wind carried it clearly to Clara. "And about Silas Thorne. What about him? Turns out Thorne has got a family in high places. The circuit judge, Judge Holloway? That is Thorne's uncle." Clara's blood ran cold. She gripped the doorframe. Jeremiah spat into the snow. "Thorne is telling anyone who will listen that a whore assaulted him and that you are harboring a fugitive. He is pressing charges. Eli says you aided a criminal. When the pass clears, the sheriff is coming, and he is bringing a warrant." Eli stood motionless. The wind whipped his coat around his legs. "Let him come," Eli said, his voice like a grinding stone. Jeremiah shook his head. "Be careful, son. Thorne is a vindictive snake. He does not just want the woman jailed. He wants to ruin you for stepping in. He is talking about seizing your land as payment for the damages." "I would like to see him try," Eli said. Jeremiah gathered his reins. "Just thought you should know. If I were you, I would get her out of the territory. Before the snow melts." He turned his horse and plodded away, disappearing into the white glare. Eli stood at the gate for a long time, staring at the horizon. Then he turned and walked back to the cabin. He stepped onto the porch, passing Clara without looking at her. "Eli," she whispered. He stopped. He did not turn around. "Pack your things," he said. Clara's heart stopped. "You are sending me away." "No," Eli said. He turned to face her. His eyes were hard, stripped of the softness she had seen the night before. But beneath the steel, there was a fierce, terrifying protectiveness. "I am not sending you anywhere, but we are not waiting for the snow to melt. What are we doing?" He looked at her, and for the first time, he looked at her not as a victim, but as a partner in a war that had just been declared. "We are getting ready," he said. "Because when they come, they are not taking you. Over my dead body." He walked past her into the house and took the shotgun down from the mantel. The quiet winter was over. The storm outside had ended, but the real storm was just beginning. The thaw had barely begun when the law came riding up the valley. It was mid-morning, the sun glaring off the receding snowpack with a brightness that made the eyes ache. The drifts were shrinking, revealing patches of wet, black earth that smelled of rot and rebirth. Clara was at the basin, washing the breakfast dishes, when she heard the heavy thud of hooves on the mud-slicked track. Eli was already on the porch. He had been expecting this since Jeremiah's warning. He stood with his thumbs hooked in his belt, his coat open to reveal the revolver at his hip. He did not look like a man welcoming guests. He looked like a boulder that had rolled down the mountain and refused to move. The rider was not Sheriff Miller. It was his deputy, a young man named Higgins, nephew to the doctor, who wore his badge like it was too heavy for his shirt. He pulled his horse up short of the gate, the animal dancing nervously in the slush. "In the morning, Mr. Vance," Higgins called out. His voice cracked slightly. Eli did not nod. "Higgins, I have got official business," Higgins said, puffing out his chest in an attempt to summon authority. "Sheriff sent me?" "I figured," Eli said flatly. "What does Miller want?" "He wants the woman." Clara froze, the wet plate in her hand dripping water onto the floorboards. She moved to the window, peering through the gap in the curtains. The deputy looked young and frightened, which made him dangerous. Frightened men with guns were the ones who pulled triggers by accident. "She is not here." Eli lied. His voice was calm, leveled. "Do not play games." "Eli," Higgins said, shifting in his saddle, "we know she is here." Thorne swore out a complaint. Assault and battery. And now, evasion of arrest. Judge Holloway signed the warrant himself this morning. Eli stepped off the porch, his boots sinking into the mud. He walked slowly toward the gate. The deputy's horse shied away, sensing the tension radiating from the man on the ground. She defended herself. Eli said. Thorne put his hands on her. "You know Thorne. You know what he is. Does not matter what I know," Higgins said, his eyes darting nervously to the cabin windows. "It matters what the judge says. And the judge says she is a fugitive. You are harboring a criminal. Eli, that is a felony. Sheriff said to tell you, if you do not bring her in by tomorrow noon, we are coming back with a posse, and we will take you both. I would like to see you try," Eli said low in his throat. Higgins paled. "Do not be a fool. Is a stray woman worth your land, worth your life? Just bring her in. Maybe the judge will go easy." Eli stopped at the fence. "Get off my land." "Higgins." The deputy hesitated, looking at the grim set of Eli's jaw and the gun on his hip. He swallowed hard, wheeled his horse around, and kicked it into a gallop, mud spraying from the hooves as he fled back toward town. Eli watched him go until he was nothing but a speck against the white hills. Then he turned and walked back to the house. When he opened the door, Clara was already shoving her few clothes into her satchel. "What do you think you are doing?" Eli asked. He stood in the doorway, blocking the light, his frame filling the entrance. Clara did not look at him. Her hands were shaking as she folded her shawl. "I am leaving. You are not going anywhere," Eli said, closing the door behind him with a decisive click. "I heard him. Eli!" Clara cried, spinning around. "They are coming back tomorrow. A posse. They will arrest you. They will take your land. I will not let you lose everything because of me." Eli walked into the room, stripping off his heavy coat. "You are not losing anything, and neither am I. You are delusional," Clara snapped, the panic rising in her chest like bile. "This is not a game. That was the law. If I stay, we both go to jail. If I leave now, I can make it to the ridge before dark. I can hide in the old mining caves until you freeze," Eli cut in, his voice rising. "Until you starve. You are 9 months pregnant. Clara, you will not make it 5 miles. "I have to try," Clara shouted back. She grabbed her bag and tried to push past him. Eli caught her arm. It was not a rough grip, but it was immovable. "No, let me go." Clara struggled, hitting his chest with her free hand. "Why are you doing this? Why are you so stubborn? Do you want to die? I want you to trust me," Eli roared, the sound of his voice, louder than she had ever heard it. Silence the room. Clara stopped struggling. She looked up at him, breathing hard, her hair falling loose from its pins. "Trust you?" she whispered, her voice trembling with a lifetime of betrayal. She wrenched her arm free and backed away, putting the table between them. "Trust is a luxury, Eli," she said, her voice shaking. "It is a luxury for women who have warm beds and husbands who do not gamble away the rent money. It is for women who do not get arrested for saying no. Women like me. We cannot afford trust. The moment we trust, we die. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. I trusted Thomas, she said, tears spilling over. I trusted him when he said just one more game. I trusted the sheriff when he said he would listen. I trusted the world to be decent. And look where it got me. Pregnant in a jail cell. And now you stand there and tell me to trust you with my life. You are just a man, Eli. You bleed like the rest of them. You cannot stop a posse with a glare. Eli stared at her. His chest was heaving. His face flushed with anger and something else. Pain. I am not Thomas, he said roughly. No, Clara said, wiping her face angrily. You are not. You are a good man. And that is why I have to leave, because Thomas destroyed me. But if I stay, I will destroy you. And I cannot live with that on my conscience, too. She grabbed her bag again. Move, Eli, please. Eli did not move. He stood rooted to the spot, looking at her with a devastation that broke her heart. If you walk out that door, he said quietly, you take the only thing I have left worth fighting for. Clara froze. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. What? She breathed. Eli ran a hand over his face, knocking his hat back. He looked exhausted, the fight draining out of him to be replaced by a raw, naked vulnerability. He walked over to the fire, turning his back to her. He rested his arm on the mantelpiece, staring down into the dying embers. You think you are the only one who is afraid? He asked softly. Clara lowered the bag. She took a hesitant step toward him. Eli? Eli laughed. A bitter, dry sound. I have been alone in this cabin for 4 years. 4 years of silence. 4 years of waking up and forgetting for a split second that they are gone, only to remember it all over again. It kills you. Clara, the quiet kills you. He turned to look at her. His eyes were wet. When I saw you in that cell, it wasn't just that you were in trouble. It was that you were alive. You were fighting. You had so much fire in you, even when you were shivering on that floor. And you were carrying a life. He took a step toward her. I have been dreaming of holding a child again for years, he admitted, his voice cracking. I wake up in the night, and my arms ache. It is a physical pain. Clara, the emptiness. I dream I am holding Samuel, and he is warm and heavy. And then I wake up and there is nothing but the wind. Clara let out a soft sob, her hand covering her mouth. But I am terrified, Eli whispered. I look at you, and I look at that baby, and I am paralyzed. Because I failed once, I let them die. If I fail you, if I let them take you, I will not survive it. That is the truth. I am not keeping you here just to be noble. I am keeping you here because I am selfish. Because I cannot go back to the dark. Clara dropped her bag. It hit the floor with a dull thud. She crossed the distance between them. She did not think, she simply moved. She reached out and took his face in her hands. His skin was rough, his beard scratching her palms, but he leaned into her touch with a desperate hunger. You are not selfish, she whispered fiercely. You are the only real thing I have found in 1,000 miles. Eli covered her hands with his own. His eyes searched hers, looking for fear, looking for doubt. I am scared. Eli, she confessed, the tears flowing freely now. I am terrified of raising this child alone. I do not know how to be a mother. I do not know how to protect her. I need help. Eli's arms went around her. He pulled her in, mindful of her belly, holding her as if she were made of glass that might shatter at any moment. You are not alone, he vowed into her hair. Not anymore. The emotional dam broke. It was a sudden, torrential release of months of held-back terror and grief. Clara buried her face in his neck, sobbing, her body shaking against his. Eli held her tighter, his own shoulders trembling. They stood there for a long time, clinging to each other in the fading light of the afternoon. The fire popped and hissed, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. Slowly, the weeping subsided. The desperate need for comfort shifted into something else, something older, something deeper. Clara pulled back slightly to look at him. Her eyes were swollen, her face blotchy, but to Eli, she looked like salvation. He traced the line of her jaw with his thumb. "Clara," he breathed. She did not answer with words. She rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. It was not like the first kiss, tentative and frightened. This was a collision. It was a claim. It was an assertion of life in the face of the void. Eli groaned, a low, guttural sound, and his mouth opened on hers, hot and demanding. He swept her up into his arms, carrying her not to the bedroom, but to the rug before the fire. He laid her down gently, his movements worshipful. The heat of the hearth was intense, but the heat between them was hotter. There were no words. Words were for lawyers and liars. This was a conversation of skin and breath and heartbeat. Eli undressed her with shaking hands, pausing to kiss the curve of her shoulder, the pulse at her throat, the swell of her breasts. When his hands moved over her stomach, he did not pull away this time. He kissed the skin there, murmuring broken prayers against the life inside. Clara arched into him, her fingers tangling in his hair. She needed this. She needed to feel him, heavy and solid and real. She needed to know that she was still a woman, not just a widow, not just a victim. They made love with a fierce, desperate slowness. It was not graceful. It was raw and unpolished, driven by the knowledge that tomorrow might bring the end of everything. Every touch was a memory being made, every kiss a fortification against the coming storm. When it was over, they lay tangled together under the buffalo robe, the fire dying down to glowing coals. The silence in the cabin was no longer empty. It was full. It was heavy with the scent of musk and wood smoke and peace. Clara lay with her head on Eli's chest, listening to the steady thrum of his heart. She felt tears leaking from her eyes again, sliding silently into the mat of hair on his chest. Eli's arm tightened around her. He kissed the top of her head. "Do not," he whispered. "I cannot help it," she murmured. "It is just, I did not think I would ever feel this again." "Neither did I," Eli said. They lay there until the fire turned to ash and the room grew cold. For the first time in months, neither of them pulled away. They slept, holding on, as if letting go would cause them to drift off the edge of the earth. When Clara woke, the bed was empty. She sat up with a start, panic flaring instantly in her chest. The buffalo robe was tucked tightly around her, but the spot beside her was cold. "Eli?" she called out. The cabin was silent. The fire had been built up again, blazing cheerfully in the grate. A pot of coffee sat on the hob, keeping warm. But Eli's coat was gone from the peg. His hat was missing. She scrambled up, wrapping the robe around herself, and ran to the window. The corral was empty. The bay horse was gone. "He left," she whispered, the betrayal hitting her like a physical blow. "He left me." She sank onto the rug, clutching the fur to her throat. Had he gone to turn her in? Had he decided that the risk was too great after all? Or had the intimacy of the night before scared him off, sent him running back to his safe? Solitary silence. The hours dragged by. Clara dressed mechanically. She drank the coffee, though it tasted like ash. She paced the floor, watching the road. Every shadow looked like a rider. Every gust of wind sounded like a posse. Noon came and went. The deadline Higgins had given them passed. "He is not coming back," she told herself, sinking onto the rocking chair. "He saved himself." But deep down, a small, stubborn voice argued. "He is not Thomas." It was late afternoon when she saw the speck on the horizon. Clara stood up, her heart hammering. She grabbed the shotgun from the corner. Eli had left it. She realized with a jolt and moved to the door. She cracked it open, resting the barrel on her forearm. The rider drew closer. It was one horse, one man. It was Eli. He was riding hard. The horse was latching and blowing. He did not slow down until he reached the gate. He swung down from the saddle before the beast had even stopped moving, tossing the reins over the post. He strode toward the porch. He looked wild. His eyes were bloodshot, his face unshaven, his boots caked in fresh mud. Clara lowered the gun, her knees weak with relief. "You came back." Eli stopped at the bottom of the steps. He looked up at her, his chest heaving. I told you, he rasped. I'm not leaving you. He walked up the steps, reaching into the inside pocket of his coat. He pulled out a folded piece of paper and a small, velvet pouch. He thrust them at her. Here, he said. Clara looked at him, bewildered. She took the paper, her fingers trembling. She unfolded it. It was a document from the county clerk's office. It was stamped with the official seal of the territory. It was a marriage license, certificate of holy matrimony. It read, "Between Eli James Vance and Clara May Miller." It was dated today. It was signed by a clerk and witnessed by two names Clara did not know. Clara stared at it, the letters swimming before her eyes. She looked up at Eli, shock rendering her speechless. "What is this?" she whispered. "It is legal," Eli said, his voice rough. "I woke up the clerk. Cost me $50 and a promise of a side of beef, but it is done. It is filed in the county ledger." He pointed a shaking finger at the paper. "You are not Clara Miller anymore. You are Clara Vance. You are my wife." He opened the velvet pouch and tipped it into her hand. A gold ring, simple and thick, landed in her palm. It was old. The gold was soft and scratched. "It was my mother's," Eli said. Clara stared at the ring, then at the paper, then at him. The shock began to recede, replaced by a rising tide of indignation. You married me," she stammered. "Without me, I had to," Eli said. "You had to?" Clara's voice rose. "You stole my name. Eli, you went into town and you signed a contract for me like I was a cow you were buying at auction. I saved your life," Eli shouted back. "The judge cannot touch you now," he continued, stepping closer, his intensity radiating off him like heat. "The warrant was for Clara Miller. Clara Miller does not exist anymore. A husband cannot be charged with harboring his own wife. The law says a wife's place is with her husband. They cannot arrest you for being in your own home." Clara threw the paper onto the floor. "It is not a home if I am a prisoner. You took away my choice. You stood here yesterday and talked about trust, and then you ride out while I am sleeping and make the biggest decision of my life without even asking me. I asked you weeks ago," Eli yelled. "And you said no because of pride. I said no because I wanted to be free," Clara screamed. "I did not want to be owned again." Eli grabbed her shoulders. He shook her, just once, desperate to make her understand. "I am not owning you. Clara, I am shielding you." He let her go, stepping back, breathing hard. He ran a hand through his hair, looking at her with pleading eyes. "They were gathering a posse. Clara, I saw them at the livery stable. 5 men. They were coming to drag you out of here in chains. They would have put you in a wagon and bounced you all the way to the county jail. You would have lost the baby. You might have died." He pointed at the ring in her hand. "I did the only thing I could think of to stop them. I rode in there and I threw my name in front of you like a shield. I told the clerk we were married private-like weeks ago and just needed the paper. I lied. I was bribed. I begged." He stopped, his voice dropping to a hoarse whisper. "I would rather be hated by you for the rest of my life than watch them take you away." Clara stood there, her chest heaving, the ring burning a hole in her palm. She looked at the man standing before her, exhausted, desperate, terrified of her anger but unyielding in his defense of her. She looked at the paper on the floor. Clara Vance. It was a trap. It was a cage. But as she looked at Eli's face, she saw the bars were not made of iron. They were made of his fear of losing her. He had bound himself to her, legally and irrevocably, to a woman with nothing but debt and trouble, just to keep her safe. Eli watched her, his shoulders slumping. The fight drained out of him, leaving him looking older and smaller. "I know I had no right," he said quietly. "I know you wanted to be free, but you are alive, and you are here." He looked down at his boots. "I will sleep in the barn," he said. I will not presume anything. The paper is just for the sheriff. It does not have to mean anything else." He looked up at her, his eyes filled with a terrifying hope. "Unless you want it to." He took a step back toward the door. "I am asking you if you will let me earn it. Clara, not the paper, forgiveness, and maybe, one day, the rest." Clara looked at him. She looked at the ring. She felt the weight of it, heavy and cold. She thought of the night before, the heat of his skin, the way he had whispered to her unborn child. She thought of Thomas, who had sold her out for a hand of cards. And she looked at Eli, who had sold his freedom to buy hers. She did not speak. She could not. The words were stuck in her throat, a tangle of gratitude and fury. She simply closed her hand over the ring, making a fist. Eli waited. The silence stretched, agonizing and long. When she did not answer, he gave a small, curt nod. He looked like a man accepting a sentence. "I will go tend the horse," he said. He turned and walked out the door, closing it softly behind him. Clara stood alone in the center of the room. She looked down at her fist. She slowly opened her fingers. The gold ring sat there, catching the light of the fire. She picked it up with her other hand. It was small. It was worn. She slid it onto her finger. It fits. She walked to the window and watched Eli leading the horse into the barn. He moved slowly, his head bowed. She touched the cold glass, watching him disappear into the shadows. She did not know if she loved him. She did not know if she could forgive him for stealing her choice. But as she looked down at the ring, she knew one thing. She was no longer running. She was Clara Vance, and she was home. The high country thaw did not come gently. It arrived with the violence of a breaking fever, turning the pristine silence of the snow-choked valley into a cacophony of dripping eaves, rushing meltwater, and the sucking squelch of mud that threatened to pull the boots right off a man's feet. Clara Vance stood on the porch, her hand resting on the rough-hewn railing, watching the world turn from white to a bruised, muddy brown. The air smelled of wet earth and pine resin, a scent so sharp it felt like waking up. She looked down at her left hand, the gold ring, soft and scratched from decades of wear by a woman she had never known, caught the pale spring sunlight. For the first week, it had felt heavy, like a shackle. She had found herself twisting it constantly, testing its weight, conscious of the lie it represented. But slowly, as the snow receded, the metal had warmed to her skin. It no longer felt like a cage. It felt like a promise she was still learning to understand. The door creaked open behind her. Eli stepped out, wiping his hands on a rag. He had been oiling the door hinges again, a nervous habit he had developed since the deputy's visit. He stopped beside her, not too close, but close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. "Mud is deep today," he observed, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in her chest. Clara nodded. "It will make the road to town impassable for a wagon." "Good," Eli said. He looked at her then, his eyes crinkling at the corners against the glare. He looked different than the man she had met in the cell. The haunted hollows of his cheeks had filled out slightly, fed by the regular meals she cooked. But more than that, the silence that surrounded him had changed. It was no longer a wall. It was a shared space. "I am going down to the creek," he said. "The water's high. Need to make sure the bridge pilings are holding. You stay off the slick ground. I am pregnant." "Eli, not invalid," Clara retorted, though there was no bite in her tone. Eli's mouth twitched beneath his beard, a smile. It was a rare, precious thing that she had made it her mission to unearth. "Take the rifle," he said, nodding toward the weapon leaning against the doorframe. Clara looked at the gun. It was a heavy Winchester, the wood stock smooth and dark with oil. Initially, she had been terrified of the weapons that littered the cabin. Now, she understood them. They were tools, no different than the cast-iron skillet or the wood axe. "I will," she said. She watched him walk down the path, his stride long and purposeful. She waited until he disappeared into the tree line before she lifted her hand again, pressing the cool gold of the ring against her lips. She was Mrs. Vance. The town believed it. The law believed it. And lately, in the quiet hours of the morning when the light was blue and gray, she was beginning to believe it too. The lessons began 3 days later. Eli set up a row of empty tin cans on a fence post 50 yards from the barn. He handed her the Winchester, the weight of it surprising her arms. "It is not about strength," Eli said, standing close behind her. His chest brushed her back. sending a jolt of awareness through her that had nothing to do with ballistics. It is about balance. Tuck the stock tight against your shoulder. If you leave a gap, it will kick you like a mule. Clara adjusted her grip, squinting down the iron sights. Her belly was cumbersome, shifting her center of gravity, but she planted her feet in the mud, wide and steady. "Why are we doing this?" she asked, lowering the barrel. "You are always here." Eli did not step back. His hands came up to correct her posture, his rough palms warm on her elbows. "Because I might not always be here." "Clara." The words hung in the cool air. Clara turned her head to look at him. His face was grim, the old shadows lengthening in his eyes. "If the baby comes while I'm out checking the herd," he continued, "or if a cougar comes down from the high rocks, you need to be able to end it. You cannot rely on me for everything." Clara felt a flash of irritation, but it was quickly extinguished by the realization of what he was actually saying. He was not pushing her away. He was empowering her. He was giving her the means to defend the life they were building. She turned back to the target. She inhaled, the smell of gunpowder and damp wool filling her nose. She pulled the stock tighter against her shoulder. "Like this?" "Higher," Eli murmured, his breath stirring the hair at her temple. "Aim for the bottom of the can. The bullet will rise." Clara exhaled. She squeezed the trigger. The crack was deafening, rolling off the canyon walls like thunder. The recoil punched her shoulder, but she held her ground. On the fence, the tin can spun wildly into the air, landing in the slush with a satisfying clatter. Eli let out a low whistle. "First shot," he said, sounding genuinely impressed. Clara lowered the gun, a fierce grin spreading across her face. She turned to him, flushed with adrenaline. "I told you," she said breathlessly. "My father was a chaotic man, but he taught me to keep my eyes open." Eli looked down at her. The grimness was gone, replaced by a warmth that made her knees weak. "Remind me never to make you angry." "Mrs. Vance," he said. Clara laughed. It was a real laugh, loud and unself-conscious, ringing out across the empty yard. She saw Eli watching her, his eyes tracking the movement of her throat, the light in her face. She reached out and poked him in the chest. "You are smiling." "Eli, I am not," he lied, fighting the curve of his lips. "You are." Your mustache twitched. Eli shook his head, looking down at his boots. But the smile broke through, transforming his weathered face into something boyish and handsome. "Come on, Annie Oakley," he said, taking the rifle from her. "Let us go inside. I think I owe you a cup of coffee." The shift in their nights was gradual, like the turning of the season. For weeks, Eli had slept in the barn, then on a pallet by the fire. But as the spring chill persisted, and the bond between them tightened, the distance seemed increasingly ridiculous. One night, the wind was howling down from the peaks, rattling the shutters. Clara lay in the large feather bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to Eli turning on the hard floor in the other room. "Eli," she called out. The shifting stopped. "Yeah, this is foolish. The floor is freezing." Silence answered her. "Eli, please," she said. "It is a big bed, and I am cold." A moment later, she heard his footsteps. He appeared in the doorway, a dark silhouette against the dying firelight. He hesitated, looking at the bed as if it were a trap. "Just for warmth," Clara whispered, pulling the quilt back on the far side. Eli moved slowly. He sat on the edge of the mattress, removing his boots. Then, with infinite care, he lay down on top of the covers. "Under," Clara commanded softly. He slid beneath the quilt, keeping a rigid foot of space between them. He lay on his back, staring straight up, his body stiff as a board. "Good night, Clara," he said tightly. "Good night, Eli." She waited. She waited until his breathing deepened, until the stiffness began to leave his frame. Then she shifted. She turned onto her side, facing him, and inch by inch, she closed the gap. She reached out and laid her hand on his chest, right over his heart. He stopped breathing for a second. Then his hand came up and covered hers. He did not push her away. He held her hand there, anchoring her to him. By morning, they were tangled together. Clara woke with her head on his shoulder, his arm thrown protectively over her waist, his hand resting near the swell of her stomach. It felt inevitable. It felt right. From that night on, the bed was theirs. The intimacy grew, fueled by the long, quiet conversations in the dark. They explored each other not with the frantic desperation of their first time by the fire, but with a slow, reverent curiosity. Clara learned the map of his scars, the jagged line on his thigh from a steer's horn, the burn on his forearm. Eli learned the shape of her changing body, treating her swollen belly with a tenderness that broke her heart. They made love with a rhythm that matched the slow pulse of the land around them. It was deep and quiet and overwhelmingly tender. Eli would kiss her neck, her face, her eyelids, whispering things he could never say in the daylight. He told her she was beautiful. He told her she was his. And Clara, who had learned to steel herself against men's touch, found herself softening, opening, blooming under his hands like a flower in the sun. But secrets, like rot, thrive in the dark. It was late April. The baby was due any day. Clara sat in the rocking chair, watching the flames dance in the hearth. Eli was mending a bridle on the floor, the leather creaking in his hands. Clara had been quiet all evening. The weight of the lie she was carrying felt heavier than the child. Every time Eli looked at her stomach with that look of awe, every time he talked about our baby, the guilt twisted a knife in her gut. She could not let him go into this blind. He was giving her everything, his name, his home, his heart. He deserved the truth, even if it destroyed her. Eli, she said. Her voice was thin, barely audible over the pop of the fire. He looked up immediately, sensing the change in the air. "What is it? Is it the baby?" "No," Clara said. She gripped the arms of the chair. "No, it is. There is something I have to say, something I should have said a long time ago." Eli set the bridle down. He turned his body fully toward her, his face serious. "You can tell me anything. Clara." Clara closed her eyes. She felt the baby kick, a sharp jab against her ribs. "You think this baby is Thomas's," she began, her voice trembling. "I told you it was Thomas's." Eli waited. He did not speak. "But I am not sure," she whispered. She opened her eyes. Tears were blurring her vision of him. Thomas, toward the end, he owed money to everyone. Bad men. Sometimes they came to the boarding house when he was not there. One night, about 8 months ago, a man came. He said he was collecting interest. Clara choked on the memory. The smell of stale whiskey and hair tonic, the rough wool of a suit, the hand over her mouth. "I fought him," she said, the tears spilling over. "I fought him hard, but he was strong. And Thomas never even asked why my dress was torn when he came home." She looked at Eli, terrified of what she would see. Disgust, pity, rejection. It might be Thomas's. She sobbed, but it might be his. "I do not know, Eli, I truly do not know. And I could not let you raise a child thinking it was one thing when it might be something born of hate." The silence that followed was absolute. The fire cracked. The wind sighed in the chimney. Clara braced herself for him to stand up. She braced herself for him to walk out the door and never come back. She had tainted his dream. She had brought the filth of her past into his clean, sacred home. Eli moved. He did not walk away. He moved across the rug on his knees until he was in front of her. He reached out and took both of her hands in his. His grip was iron hard, shaking slightly. "Look at me." "Clara." She shook her head, shame burning her face. "Look at me," he commanded, his voice rough. She forced her eyes up. Eli's face was fierce. There was anger there. Yes, but it was a cold, dangerous anger directed at a ghost she could not name. Not at her. His eyes were clear and burning with a conviction that took her breath away. "I do not care," he said. Clara's breath hitched. "Eli, I do not care who planted the seed," he said, his voice low and intense. "It does not matter. Not a damn bit. You are carrying it. You are feeding it with your blood and your breath. That makes it yours." He released one of her hands and placed his palm firmly on her stomach. "Claiming it. And you are my wife. Clara, I chose you. I chose all of you. Your past, your pain, your debts. He leaned in, his eyes locking onto hers. That baby is yours. That makes it mine. Clara stared at him, her heart stopping. Mine, he repeated. Blood does not make a father. Clara, love does. Staying does. And I am staying. When that baby comes, I will be the first thing it sees. I will be the one to teach it to ride. I will be the one to chase away the nightmares. And no man, living or dead, is going to take that away from me. Clara let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. The relief was so profound it made her dizzy. The walls she had built around that secret crumbled into dust. You mean that? She whispered. Eli leaned forward and kissed her forehead. Hard. I have never meant anything more in my life. Clara slumped forward, burying her face in his shoulder. He held her while she wept, rocking her gently, murmuring soft words into her hair. She had thought she was damaged goods. She had thought she was broken. But in his arms, she realized that broken things could be mended, and that love, real love, was not about perfection. It was about showing up, scars and all, and saying, I am here, peace, however, is often just the eye of the storm. 2 weeks later, the mud had dried enough for travel. They needed supplies, flour, sugar, and cloth for diapers. Clara was too close to her time to ride, so Eli hitched the team to the wagon. I will be back before sundown, he promised, kissing her goodbye on the porch. Keep the Winchester close. I always do. She smiled. The day passed slowly. Clara busied herself with folding the tiny clothes she had sewn, placing them in the cedar cradle Eli had carved. Every time she looked at the cradle, she felt a warm glow of disbelief. This was her life now. This safety. This love. It was late afternoon when the wagon returned. Clara walked out to the porch, wiping flour from her hands. She smiled as Eli pulled the team up, but the smile faded instantly when she saw his face. He looked like thunder. His jaw was set so hard a muscle feathered in his cheek. He jumped down from the wagon, not bothering to tie the reins, and stormed up the steps. What is it? Clara asked, fear spiking in her chest. What happened? Eli brushed past her into the cabin. Get your bag, he said. Clara followed him. Eli, you're scaring me. Eli paced the room, running a hand through his hair. He looked like a caged animal. There is a man in town, he said abruptly. Arrived on the noon stage. What man? He calls himself Mr. Sterling, dressed like a banker, talks like a lawyer. He was in the saloon, asking questions, asking about a woman, a pregnant widow who ran from St. Louis. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. She reached for the back of a chair to steady herself. He works for the creditors, Eli spat, or the railroad, or whoever it was Thomas crossed. He has a description. Clara, he knows you are in the territory. Clara's hands flew to her mouth. He found me. Eli stopped pacing. He turned to her, his eyes blazing. He asked Miller about newcomers. Miller told him about the marriage, told him I brought home a wife a few months back. Clara gasped. Sterling is smart, Eli said. He put 2 and 2 together. He was asking directions to the ranch when I left. He will be here, maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow. Clara's mind raced. Panic, cold and familiar, washed over her. It was a nightmare returning. The past she thought she had outrun had caught up to her. She moved. She went to the bedroom and dragged her satchel out from under the bed. Clara, what are you doing? Eli asked. I have to go, she said, her voice high and thin. I have to leave. Eli blocked the bedroom door. Stop! Move! Eli! Clara cried, shoving clothes into the bag. Don't you understand? He is not just a creditor. These men, they are vicious. If they find me here, they will burn this place down. They will hurt you. They will take everything you have to pay Thomas's debt. I do not care about the debt, Eli shouted. I do, Clara screamed back. I will not let you lose your home for me. I will not let you get hurt. I have to go. If I leave now, I can lead them away from the ranch. I can... Eli grabbed the bag from her hands and threw it across the room. It hit the wall with a heavy thud, spilling baby clothes onto the floor. You are not going anywhere, he roared. Clara recoiled, shocked by his volume. You think you can just run? Eli demanded, stepping close to her. You think you can walk out into the wilderness, 9 months pregnant, and survive? You think that protects me? It saves your life. Clara wept. It ends. Eli grabbed her shoulders. Look at me. He shook her, his eyes wild with a terrifying desperation. I lost a wife, Clara. I lost a son. I buried them in the frozen ground behind this cabin, and I stood there for 4 years waiting to die because I had nothing left to live for. His voice broke, cracking into a sob that tore at her heart. You walked into that cell and you woke me up. You gave me a reason to breathe again. You gave me a family. He pulled her against him, crushing her to his chest. I have already lost a family, he whispered fiercely into her hair. I will not lose another. I will not. Clara sobbed against his chest, her fists clutching his shirt. But they will hurt you, she wailed. Let them try, Eli said. His voice shifted. It became cold, deadly calm. Let them come. I have a rifle. I have the high ground, and I have something to fight for this time. He pulled back to look at her. He cupped her face in his hands, wiping away the tears with his thumbs. You are my wife. Clara Vance, this is your home. And nobody, not a banker, not a gunman, not the devil himself, is dragging you out of here. Clara looked at him. She saw the terror in his eyes, not terror of the men coming, but terror of the empty silence returning. She realized then that leaving him would not be an act of mercy. It would be the cruelest thing she could ever do. Okay, she whispered. Okay. Eli let out a long, shuddering breath. He rested his forehead against hers. We stand our ground, he said. Together, together, Clara echoed. Eli stepped back. He walked to the window and looked out at the darkening road. He reached up and took the Winchester from the rack. He checked the load, the metallic click of the lever sounding loud in the quiet room. Go lie down, he said gently. Rest. I will take the first watch. Clara did not argue. She walked to the bedroom, stepping over the spilled baby clothes. She paused at the door and looked back. Eli was pulling a chair to the window, the rifle across his knees, his silhouette cut sharp against the twilight. He looked like a guardian. He looked like a father. She went to the bed and lay down, her hand on her belly. The baby kicked, strong and defiant. Let them come, she thought, a new, fierce steel hardening in her own heart. Let them come. We are ready. The dust arrived before the man did. It rose in a brown, choking plume from the road that snaked along the valley floor, heralded by the rattle of a buggy's iron-rimmed wheels against stone. Eli stood on the porch, his hand resting near the Colt at his hip. He had been standing guard for 2 days, sleeping in shifts, his eyes permanently scanned on the horizon. Clara was inside, the door barred, watching through the gap in the heavy curtains. The buggy was black, polished to a shine that had no business in the rugged terrain of the territory. The horse pulling it was a high-stepping trotter, an animal bred for city parks, not mountain passes. The driver pulled up at the gate. He did not look like a gunman. He wore a gray wool suit, a bowler hat, and spectacles that caught the afternoon sun. He climbed down, brushing dust from his lapels with a fastidious, irritating motion. Mr. Vance, I presume, the stranger called out. His voice was clipped, Eastern, devoid of the local drawl. Eli did not move. State your business. My name is Arthur Sterling. I represent the firm of Blackwood and O'Hare, out of St. Louis. Sterling unlatched the gate and walked up the path. He carried a leather satchel and an air of supreme confidence. He stopped at the bottom of the steps, looking up at Eli with a cool, appraising gaze. I am here for the woman, Sterling said. Mrs. Thomas Miller. There is no Mrs. Miller here, Eli said, his voice flat. My wife's name is Clara Vance. Sterling smiled. It was a thin, bloodless expression. Yes, I heard about the hasty nuptials. A charming gesture. Mr. Vance, but legally void. You see, Mrs. Miller is in possession of property that belongs to my clients. She has nothing. Eli said, "She came here with the clothes on her back." Sterling tapped the side of his nose. "Not quite. She carries the heir to the Miller estate. And more importantly, she carries the burden of Thomas Miller's liabilities." He took a step up. Thomas Miller was not just a gambler. Mr. Vance. He was an embezzler. He defrauded the Union Pacific Railroad of nearly $15,000 in a land grant scheme. He died before he could be questioned. The debt falls to his estate. Since he had no assets, the debt fell to his widow. And if she cannot pay, she will work it off in the debtor's prison in Missouri. A cold fury settled in Eli's gut. "You are not taking her anywhere. I have a federal warrant," Sterling said, reaching into his coat. "Do not," Eli warned. Sterling froze. He looked at Eli's hand hovering over the gun. "You would shoot an officer of the court?" Sterling asked, his eyebrows raising. "That is a hanging offense." "I am not shooting an officer," Eli said. "I am shooting a trespasser who is threatening my family." Sterling sighed. He withdrew his hand slowly. Empty. "Very well. If you want to do this the hard way." He turned, whistling sharp and loud, from the back of the buggy. Under the canvas cover where Eli had assumed luggage was stored, 2 men rolled out. They were not lawyers. They were hired muscle, rough men with scarred knuckles and clubs in their hands. They had been waiting. "Get him," Sterling commanded. The first man charged up the steps. Eli drew, but the man was fast, swinging a heavy wooden club that struck Eli's forearm, sending the revolver spinning into the mud. Eli roared, ignoring the pain, and drove his shoulder into the man's chest. They went down in a tangle of limbs, crashing off the porch into the dirt. The second man jumped into the fray, kicking Eli in the ribs. Eli fought with the desperate, savage strength of a man defending his life. He caught the first man's boot, twisting it until the ankle snapped with a sickening crunch. The man screamed. Eli rolled, coming up to his knees, and drove a fist into the second man's gut, doubling him over. But Sterling was moving, while Eli was engaged. The lawyer had run up the steps and kicked the door open. "Clara!" Eli shouted, blood streaming from a cut over his eye. Sterling strode into the cabin. "Mrs. Miller, come out now, and I will ensure the child is placed in a decent orphanage." He reached for Clara, who was backing toward the hearth. "Get away from me!" she screamed. She lifted the heavy Winchester rifle Eli had taught her to use. She struggled with the weight of it, her belly hindering her balance. But she leveled the barrel at Sterling's chest. Sterling laughed. "You will not shoot, my dear. You are a lady." He lunged. Clara pulled the trigger. The hammer clicked. It was empty. Eli had unloaded it the night before to clean it and, in his exhaustion, had forgotten to reload. Sterling grabbed the barrel, wrenching it from her hands. He tossed it aside and seized her wrist, twisting it behind her back. "Enough of this," he snarled. "You are coming with me." Suddenly, a shadow fell over the door. Sterling turned just as Eli slammed into him. It was like being hit by a falling tree. Eli drove Sterling backward, pinning him against the wall. The lawyer's spectacles flew off. Eli's hands, calloused and stained with mud and blood, wrapped around Sterling's throat. "You touched her," Eli hissed, his eyes wild. He squeezed. Sterling's face turned red, then purple. He clawed at Eli's hands, his legs kicking uselessly. "Eli!" Clara screamed. "Eli, stop! You will kill him!" Eli did not loosen his grip. The rage was a red tide in his vision. This man wanted to put Clara in a cage. This man wanted to sell their child. "Eli, please!" Clara grabbed his arm, pulling with all her strength. "Think of the baby. Do not become a murderer for him." The word baby pierced the fog. Eli blinked, looking at Clara's terrified face. He looked at the man gasping for life under his thumbs. He released his grip. Sterling slid to the floor, coughing and retching, clutching his bruised throat. Eli stepped back, his chest heaving. He looked at the 2 thugs groaning in the yard, then back at the lawyer. "Get out," Eli said. His voice was quiet, terrifyingly so. Sterling scrambled backward, crab-walking toward the door. You're making a mistake. The railroad. They will not stop." "If I see you on my land again," Eli said, "I will bury you in the holes you dug for yourself." He grabbed Sterling by the collar of his expensive suit and dragged him out to the porch. He threw him down the stairs. "Take your trash and go," Eli commanded. Sterling stumbled to his buggy, helping his limping men into the back. He looked at Eli one last time, his eyes filled with venom. "This isn't over. Vance," he croaked, "you cannot fight the Union Pacific." Eli watched them ride away, the buggy lurching violently over the ruts. He stood there until they were gone, the adrenaline slowly draining away to leave a throbbing ache in his ribs and arm. He turned to Clara. She was leaning against the doorframe, her face pale, holding her stomach. "Are you hurt?" he asked, rushing to her. "No," she whispered, "just scared." Eli wrapped his arms around her, burying his face in her hair. "I am sorry. I forgot to load the gun. I am so sorry. You stopped him?" she said, trembling against him. "You stopped him." But as they stood there, watching the dust settle, they both knew the truth. Sterling was right. He was just the first wave. The railroad had deep pockets and long memories. They had won the skirmish, but the war had just arrived at their doorstep. The pain started 3 hours later. It began as a dull ache in Clara's lower back, rhythmic and insistent. She tried to ignore it, attributing it to the stress of the fight. But by sundown, it had wrapped around her torso like a tightening vice. Outside, the weather had turned with the sudden violence of the high country. The blue sky had been swallowed by towering anvil clouds, black and purple, bruising the horizon. The wind picked up, howling through the pines, carrying the heavy scent of ozone and rain. Eli was boarding up the window where the shutter had broken during the winter. He saw Clara grip the back of the rocking chair, her knuckles white, her breath hissing through her teeth. "Clara?" He dropped the hammer. "It is time," she gasped. "Now?" Eli looked at her, panic flaring in his eyes. "It is 2 weeks early. The baby does not care about the calendar." Clara groaned as another contraction seized her. Eli ran to the door and looked out. The storm was unleashing its fury. Rain was falling in sheets, turning the yard into a quagmire. Lightning forked across the sky, illuminating the valley in stark, strobe light flashes. "I have to get Doc Higgins," Eli said, grabbing his oilskin coat. "No!" Clara cried. "You cannot ride in this. The creek will be flooded. I have to try," Eli shouted over the thunder. "I do not know how to do this. Clara, I am a cattleman, not a midwife." He kissed her hurriedly. "Boil water. Find the clean linens. I will be back. I promise." He ran out into the deluge. Clara watched him saddle the bay mare, the horse rearing in the lightning. Then he galloped out of the gate, disappearing into the wall of rain. Clara was alone. She moved through the cabin between contractions, gathering what she knew she would need. She stoked the fire, though the heat made her sweat. She found the scissors, the twine, and the stack of clean sheets. The pain was different than she expected. It was not just pain, it was a force of nature, a tide that sought to split her apart. She paced the floor, moaning low in her throat, praying for Eli. An hour passed, then 2. The contractions were coming faster now, barely a minute apart. Clara had collapsed onto the bed, gripping the iron headboard, screaming into the pillow as her body bore down. She heard the sound of hooves. The door burst open. Eli stood there, drenched to the bone, water pouring off his hat. He looked wild, defeated. "The bridge is gone," he shouted, slamming the door against the wind. "The creek washed it out. I tried to cross at the ford, but the mare nearly drowned." He stripped off his wet coat and rushed to the bedside. "I could not get him. Clara, I could not get across." Clara looked up at him, sweat plastering her hair to her forehead. "Then it is you, Eli," she whispered. "It has to be you." Eli looked at her, then at his trembling hands. He took a deep breath, forcing the panic down, locking it away in the same box where he kept his grief. "Okay," he said. "Okay." He washed his hands in the boiling water, scrubbing them until the skin was red and raw. He came back to the bed. "Tell me what to do," he said. The next 4 hours were a blur of agony and terror. Eli was no longer a rancher. He was an anchor. He held Clara's hand when the pain threatened to drag her under. He wiped her face with cool clothes. He spoke to her, a steady stream of encouragement that cut through the roar of the storm outside. "You are doing it. Clara, you are strong. You are the strongest woman I know." The final stage was brutal. Clara felt as though she were being torn in two. She screamed, a raw, primal sound that made Eli flinch, but he did not look away. "I see the head," he said, his voice shaking with awe. "One more, Clara. Give me one more. I cannot," she wailed. "I cannot do it." "Yes, you can," Eli shouted. "Look at me. You fought off a bear. You fought off Sterling. You can do this. Push." Clara gathered every ounce of strength left in her exhausted body. She screamed and pushed, feeling the world shift on its axis. And then, silence. A cry cut through the room, high, thin, and furious. Eli sat back, holding a slippery, wriggling bundle in his hands. He looked at it, stunned. He looked at Clara, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the rain that still dripped from his hair. "It is a girl," he choked out. "Clara, it is a girl." He quickly cleared the baby's mouth, wrapped her in a warm flannel sheet, and laid her on Clara's chest. Clara looked down at the tiny, squalling face, dark hair, angry eyes. She was perfect. "Hope," Clara whispered. "Her name is Hope." She looked up at Eli to smile, but the room suddenly tilted. The edges of her vision went gray. A coldness, deeper than the winter snow, began to spread from her core. "Clara." Eli's voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. She felt wet, not the sweat, something else. Eli looked down. The bedsheets were turning crimson. The blood was pooling fast, soaking the mattress, dripping onto the floor. "Clara!" Eli yelled, snatching the baby and placing her in the cradle. He turned back to Clara. She was pale, her lips turning blue. Her eyes were rolling back in her head. "No," Eli gasped. "No, no, no!" He grabbed a pile of towels and pressed them against her, leaning his entire weight into the pressure. "Stay with me," he commanded, his voice cracking. "Do not you dare leave me. Clara, I am tired," Clara whispered. "You cannot sleep," Eli shouted. "Open your eyes." The blood did not stop. It was escaping her faster than he could staunch it. The nightmares of 4 years ago came rushing back. The silence, the cold body, the loneliness. Eli felt a terror so pure it nearly stopped his heart. He was losing her. He had fought the law, the creditors, the storm, only to lose her to nature. He did the only thing he had left. He dropped his forehead to her shoulder, keeping the pressure on her abdomen with his hands. And he prayed. "Please," he begged, the words torn from his throat. "God, please, do not take her. Take me. Take everything I have. Burn the ranch. Strike me dead. But do not take her," he sobbed, his tears falling onto her skin. "I cannot do it again. Lord, I cannot be alone again. Please, she is all I have." He pressed harder, willing his own strength into her body, willing the blood to stop. He spoke to her, calling her back from the edge. "Think of Hope, Clara. She needs you. I need you. Do not go where I cannot follow." Minutes dragged like hours. The storm outside raged, shaking the cabin walls. Inside, a man fought death with nothing but his hands and his desperate love. Slowly, miraculously, the flow began to ebb. The crimson tide slowed. Clara's breathing, which had become shallow and ragged, hitched and deepened. Eli did not move for an hour. He stayed there, pressing, praying, listening to every beat of her heart. Finally, Clara stirred. "Eli?" Her voice was a ghost of a whisper. "I am here," he choked out. Is she okay? She is sleeping," Eli said. "She is beautiful." Clara's hand moved weakly, brushing his hair. "You are crying." Eli lifted his head. His face was ravaged by grief and exhaustion. He looked at her, really looked at her, seeing the color slowly returning to her cheeks. "I thought you were gone," he whispered. "I heard you," Clara said softly. "I heard you calling me back. Eli collapsed forward, burying his face in the curve of her neck. He wept. He wept for Sarah and Samuel. He wept for the years of silence. He wept for the terror of the last hour and the overwhelming, crushing gratitude of the present. He kissed her forehead. He kissed her cheeks, tasting the salt of her sweat. He kissed her pale lips, reverently, desperately. "You gave me a family again," he whispered, his voice broken. Clara held him as tightly as her weak arms allowed. "I would fight the world for you, Clara," he vowed. "I would fight the whole damn world." The storm outside began to break. The thunder rolled away to the east, leaving behind the steady rhythm of the rain. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled low. In the cradle, the baby sighed in her sleep, and on the blood-stained bed, Eli Vance held his wife, listening to the sound of her breathing, the sweetest music he had ever heard. The recovery was not a straight line. It was a slow, meandering path through days of exhaustion and nights of feverish dreams. But this time, Clara did not walk it alone. For the first 3 weeks, she barely left the bed. Her body, ravaged by the difficult birth and the blood loss, felt as brittle as dried parchment, but Eli was a constant, steady presence. He was no longer the silent recluse who slept in the barn. He was a man possessed by a singular, fierce devotion. He learned to swaddle the infant with hands that were accustomed to branding irons and fence posts. He learned to brew willow bark tea to ease Clara's pain. He washed the blood-stained sheets in the creek, scrubbing until his knuckles were raw, refusing to let her lift a finger. They named the child Hope. It was Clara's choice, but Eli had carved the name into the headboard of the cradle before she had even spoken it aloud. It seemed the only fitting title for a life that had bloomed in the teeth of a blizzard, a defiance of death itself. By the time the aspen leaves began to turn from green to shimmering gold, signaling the end of summer, Clara was strong enough to walk to the gate. She stood there, the baby wrapped in a quilt against her chest, breathing in the sharp, clean air. The fear that had hunted her for so long, the fear of Thomas's debts, of Sterling, of the law, had not vanished, but it had changed. It was no longer a monster under the bed. It was simply a storm on the horizon, and she knew now that she had a shelter that could withstand it. "We need supplies," Eli said one morning, adjusting the cinch on the wagon team. Clara looked up from the porch, shielding her eyes against the sun. "You mean you need supplies? You usually go alone." "Not this time," Eli said. He walked up the steps, his boots heavy on the wood. "It is time. Clara, we are not hiding. If we hide, they think we are ashamed. And I have nothing to be ashamed of." Clara felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach. The town, the stairs, the whispers. She looked down at Hope, sleeping soundly in her arms. "They will talk," she said quietly. "Let them," Eli replied. He reached out, running a knuckle down the baby's soft cheek. "Let them see what a family looks like." The ride into Split Rock felt like a procession into enemy territory. The town had not changed. The same muddy thoroughfare, the same peeling paint on the saloon, the same feeling of desperation clinging to the eaves. But Clara had changed. She sat straight on the wagon bench, her chin lifted, the gold ring on her finger catching the light. Eli drove the wagon right down the center of the street. He did not hurry. He nodded to the blacksmith. He tipped his hat to the postmaster. He projected an air of calm, unbothered ownership that dared anyone to challenge him. They pulled up in front of the mercantile. As Eli helped Clara down, a hush fell over the boardwalk. 2 women sweeping their porches stopped to stare. A group of miners lounging by the livery stable fell silent, nudging each other. Clara felt the weight of their eyes. She felt the old urge to shrink, to hide, to apologize for her existence. Then she felt Eli's hand on the small of her back. It was warm and solid, a physical reminder that she was anchored. "Head high, Mrs. Vance," he murmured against her ear. They walked into the store. It smelled of coffee beans and calico. At the counter, Mrs. Higgins, the doctor's wife, was measuring out flour. She froze when she saw them. "Good morning, Mrs. Higgins," Eli said, his voice booming in the quiet shop. "We need 50 pounds of flour and a bolt of flannel. Mrs." Higgins looked at Eli, then at Clara, then at the baby. Her mouth worked silently for a moment. "I heard," she stammered. "I heard there was a baby." "A daughter," Eli said proudly. "Hope Vance, Mrs." Higgins peered over the counter. "Well," she said, her severe expression softening despite herself. "She has her mother's eyes." Before Clara could respond, the bell over the door jingled. The air in the room suddenly grew heavy. Judge Holloway walked in. He was a large man, dressed in a black frock coat that strained at the buttons, with a face that looked like it had been carved from suet. He was Silas Thorne's uncle, and the man who had signed the warrant for Clara's arrest. The shop went deathly still. "Well," Holloway boomed, hooking his thumbs in his vest, "if it is not the happy couple, I must say, Vance, you have a unique interpretation of the law." Eli turned slowly. "Judge, I have been reviewing the paperwork," Holloway said, stepping closer. His eyes slid over Clara with a greasy familiarity that made her skin crawl. "Very convenient marriage license. Some might say it's suspicious." "It is legal," Eli said, his voice dropping an octave. "Legal is a matter of interpretation," Holloway sneered. "And as for the fugitive, well, hiding behind a surname does not erase the past. My dear, my nephew is still nursing a bruised ego, and the railroad is still asking questions." Clara felt Eli tense beside her. She saw his hand twitch toward his hip. She knew that violence was coiled inside him, ready to spring, and she knew that if he struck the judge, there would be no saving them. She stepped forward. She moved out from the circle of Eli's protection, shifting the baby to her left hip. She walked until she was 2 feet from the judge, forcing him to look down at her. "You call it a bruised ego," she said, her voice clear and ringing in the silence. "I call it assault." The judge blinked, taken aback. "Beg your pardon?" "Your nephew," Clara continued, her voice gaining strength. "Silas Thorne. He cornered a pregnant woman in a saloon. He put his hands on me when I asked him to stop. He offered me money for favors I did not want to sell." A gasp went through the shop. "Mrs." Higgins put her hand to her throat. "He lied," Clara said, staring straight into the judge's watery eyes. "He told you I attacked him, but you know Silas, and everyone in this room knows Silas. Does he look like a man who gets attacked by starving women? Or does he look like a bully who got slapped for forgetting his manners?" Holloway's face turned a mottled red. "Watch your tongue. Woman, you are speaking to a judge. I am speaking to a man," Clara said. "And I am telling you that if you come for my family again, if you send men to my house to threaten my husband and my child, I will not need a lawyer. I will testify. I will stand up in your own courtroom and I will tell every woman in this territory exactly what kind of men run this town." She looked around the room. She caught the eye of Mrs. Higgins. She caught the eye of the baker's wife by the door. "And I think they will believe me," Clara finished softly. "Because they know." The silence that followed was suffocating. Holloway opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked at the women in the shop. He saw the way Mrs. Higgins was nodding, just slightly. He saw the way the atmosphere had shifted. The shame that he had tried to weaponize against Clara had been turned back on him. He huffed, adjusting his coat. "If you are done making a scene," he muttered. He turned and marched out of the store, the bell jingling angrily behind him. Clara stood there, her heart hammering against her ribs. She felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to see Mrs. Higgins. "The flannel is on the house, dear," the older woman said quietly. "For the baby." Clara looked at Eli. He was grinning. It was a fierce, wild grin of absolute triumph. He took the flour sack from the counter, threw it over his shoulder, and offered her his arm. "Let us go home. Mrs. Vance," he said. "The victory in town brought a reprieve, but it did not fill the larder. The winter was coming again, and with a new mouth to feed. The meager savings Eli had tucked away were dwindling. The cattle market was down, and the ranch, neglected during the months of Clara's pregnancy and recovery, was not producing enough to sustain them. In November, A man from the mining syndicate came to the ranch. He offered Eli a job. It is a freight run, Eli explained that night by the fire. Gold shipments from the high-load mine down to the railhead. 3 days round trip. It is dangerous, Clara said. She was rocking the cradle, her foot tapping a steady rhythm. She did not look up. It pays $50 a run. Eli said, 5 runs, and we have enough for the winter. We can buy seeds for the spring. We can fix the barn roof. And if you get shot? Clara asked, looking at him then. If bandits hit the wagon? The high-load run is notorious. Eli, that is why they are paying so much. They are paying for a target. Eli knelt beside her chair. He took her hands, his thumbs rubbing the rough skin of her knuckles. I am good at this. Clara, I can shoot. I know the terrain, and I am not going to take risks. I am going to do the job and come home. Clara pulled her hands away. You promised. You said you would not leave us. I am doing this so I do not have to leave you, Eli insisted gently. If we cannot pay the taxes on the land next year, the bank takes the ranch. If we starve, the state takes hope. I am doing this to keep the wolves at the door. Clara. Clara looked at the fire. She hated it. She hated the cruelty of a world that demanded blood for bread. But she looked at the baby, sleeping peacefully. And she knew he was right. They were fighting for a future, and freedom was not free. Do 5 runs, she whispered. Just 5. 5. Eli promised. Then I am back to being a rancher full-time. The night before his first departure was heavy with unspoken fears. The cabin felt too small for the emotions that crowded the air. They put Hope to sleep early and sat by the fire, drinking coffee, avoiding the subject of the morning. Come to bed, Eli said finally. In the darkness of the bedroom, the desperation took hold. They reached for each other not with the gentle curiosity of the summer, but with a fierce, clinging need. Clara ran her hands over the scars on his back, memorizing the texture of his skin. Eli kissed her as if he were trying to breathe his soul into her lungs. Promise me, Clara whispered against his mouth. Promise me you will come back. I will always come back, Eli vowed. Death would have to drag me away, kicking and screaming. They made love slowly, tenderly, every touch a prayer against the distance. Afterwards, Clara lay awake long after Eli had fallen asleep, listening to the wind pick up outside, sounding like a warning. The weeks that followed were a test of endurance. Eli would ride out on Monday morning and return on Wednesday night. The days he was gone were endless gray stretches of anxiety. Clara worked the ranch as best she could, chopping wood, feeding the horses, tending to the baby. But her eyes were always on the road. He survived the first run, then the second, then the third and fourth. With each return, he brought money, solid silver dollars that they stacked in a jar on the mantelpiece. But he also brought exhaustion. He grew thinner, his eyes shadowed by long nights of watching the tree line for ambush. The 5th run was scheduled for mid-December. The snow had already begun to fall, dusting the peaks in white. Last one, Eli said as he saddled the bay. He checked his rifle, sliding it into the scabbard. I will be back before the heavy stuff hits. Be careful, Clara said, handing him a tin of biscuits. The pass is treacherous in the snow. I will be home for Christmas. He smiled, kissing her. Keep the fire hot. He rode out. Clara watched him go until he disappeared around the bend, a lone dark figure against the vast whiteness of the world. Wednesday came. The snow started at noon, heavy, wet flakes that stuck to everything. By sundown, it was a blizzard. Clara sat by the window, the baby in her lap. The road was empty. Midnight passed. The fire burned down to embers. He is waiting out the storm, she told herself. He is smart. He is holed up in a way station. Thursday passed. The snow deepened. Friday morning dawned clear and bitterly cold. The silence of the valley was deafening. Clara bundled Hope into her heavy woolens and strapped her to her chest. She put on her coat and boots. She took the Winchester. I'm going to the gate, she told the empty room. Just to the gate. She waded through the drifts, her breath pluming in the icy air. She scanned the horizon, her eyes watering from the glare. Nothing. Then, a movement. Far down the valley. a black shape against the snow. A horse. Riderless. Clara's heart stopped. She let out a cry that was torn from her throat. She began to run, stumbling through the deep snow, dragging her heavy skirts. "Eli!" she screamed. The horse drew closer. It was the bay. It was limping. And then she saw him. He was not in the saddle. He was slumped over the horse's neck, clinging to the mane, his body listing dangerously to the side. "Eli!" Clara reached the horse. Grabbing the bridle, the animal stopped, blowing steam. Eli raised his head. His face was gray, drained of blood. His coat was stiff with frozen red stains on the left shoulder. "Clara," he rasped. He tried to slide down, but his legs gave way. He tumbled into the snow. Clara dropped the rifle and fell to her knees beside him. She grabbed his face, slapping his cheeks lightly. "Eli, look at me! Look at me! Got ambushed!" he whispered, his teeth chattering violently. "Pass! At the ridge! Took one! In the shoulder!" He coughed, a wet, rattling sound. "Rode! All night! Had to keep promise, you fool!" Clara sobbed, trying to pull him up. "You stubborn, beautiful fool." She managed to get his good arm over her shoulder, with a strength born of pure adrenaline. She hauled him to his feet. He was heavy, dead weight, but she did not falter. She dragged him step by agonizing step through the snow, up the path, up the stairs, and into the warmth of the cabin. The night was a blur of blood and firelight. Clara cut the coat off him. The bullet had passed through the fleshy part of the shoulder, a clean through and through, missing the bone and the lung, but he had lost a terrifying amount of blood. She heated the knife. She cleaned the wound with whiskey. She stitched the jagged skin closed with hands that did not shake, channeling the same steel Eli had shown when she was birthing Hope. Eli drifted in and out of consciousness, muttering names: Sarah, Samuel, Clara, Hope. By midnight, the fever broke. His breathing settled into a natural rhythm. Clara sat on the floor beside the bed, her head resting on the mattress, her hand gripping his. She must have dozed off, because the sound of his voice startled her. "Clara," she jerked up. Eli's eyes were open. They were clear. "I am here," she said, leaning over him. "I am here." "You are safe?" he asked. "We are safe," she said, brushing the hair back from his damp forehead. "You are home. You did it, Eli. You came back." Eli tried to smile, but it was more of a grimace. "Told you. Death would have to drag me." "Hush," Clara said, tears spilling onto her cheeks. "Do not talk. Just rest." Eli moved his hand. Finding hers, he squeezed it weakly. "I was scared. Clara," he whispered. "Out there in the snow. I was not scared of dying. I was scared of leaving you alone again." Clara laid her cheek against his hand. "You are never leaving me. I won't let you." She looked at him, her heart swelling until she thought it might burst. She realized then that the fear was gone, the fear of the creditors, the fear of the town, the fear of the past. It had all been burned away by the fire of this man's loyalty. "I love you," she said. The words hung in the quiet room. She had never said them before, not to Thomas, not to anyone. "I love you, Eli Vance," she repeated, sobbing softly. "I love you more than I have ever loved anything in this life." Eli looked at her. The pain in his face smoothed away, replaced by a peace she had not seen in him since the day they met. "I know," he whispered. He lifted his hand to cup her face, his thumb wiping away a tear. "I have loved you since you slept behind bars. Clara, I loved you when you were broken. I love you now that you are whole." Clara leaned down and kissed him. It was a kiss of salt and relief, a seal on a covenant that had been written in snow and blood. A sound came from the corner, a soft coo. Hope was awake. Clara stood up and went to the cradle. She picked up the baby, who was blinking in the firelight, and brought her to the bed. She laid the child in the crook of Eli's good arm. Eli looked down at his daughter. He looked at his wife. The wind howled outside, battering the log walls, searching for a way in. But the chinking held. The fire burned hot. The gun was loaded. The debt was paid. And the ghosts were finally, truly silent. Eli closed his eyes, a faint smile touching his lips. He began to hum. It was a low, rough sound, a lullaby he had not sung in 5 years, vibrating deep in his chest. Go to sleep, little baby. When you wake, you shall have all the pretty little horses. Clara sat on the edge of the bed, leaning back against his uninjured shoulder. She closed her eyes, listening to the wind and the song. And for the first time in her life, she did not wonder when the other shoe would drop. She simply sat in the warmth of the fire and smiled. Author's note: thank you for journeying with me through the snow and grit of the American West. It has been a pleasure to bring Clara and Eli's story to life for you. I hope their struggle for love and survival resonated with you. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment letting me know where in the world you are listening from. If you enjoyed this tale, please subscribe to From Wild West for more stories of love, danger, and redemption on the frontier. Share your thoughts on the ending in English. I read every one. Until the next time, keep your powder dry and your fires burning.